So welcome back to our afternoon session of day 2 of the Mindfulness Conference. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chris Parsons, or Darth Academy, today, who's going to be giving us a talk on fighting the dark side of academia and conservation. So Chris is a marine mammal conservationist and ocean science communicator, and he has a birth of experience fighting academia. So I'm really looking forward to this talk, and I hope everybody else does too. Put any questions or discussion points in the chat, and we will address them at the end. Chris is going to talk, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards.
So this presentation, I'm going to be going through kind of a few sort of case studies of toxicity that I've encountered through my career in academia for the past 20, 30 years. So all the things I'm suggesting, do not do. So there are examples of toxicity. So just putting it out there, this is what you would do if you were an evil academic. So let us begin. So listen, my Sith apprentice, strong in knowledge you are, but there are those who are stronger and more intelligent than you. So to preserve and gain status, strong in the dark side you must become. In these times, funding is limited, tenure positions are few, and competition is great. Graduate students are many, and many of these have ideas for new research, new hypotheses and ideas that pose a threat to the current order. The hierarchy must be maintained with us at the apex. No competition must be allowed. White-bearded males must succeed. Nurturing cooperation and egalitarianism, those are characteristics of the light side, and the light side is weak, and progress on the light side is slow. So, my Sith apprentice, here is my advice to you to progress and succeed, especially when there are those around you who are more innovative and knowledgeable and more intelligent than you. Always claim credit for other people's work. Join committees and take on graduate students and stay in the shadows doing nothing, but wait and watch until success is near, then swoop in and claim the idea if the project was all yours in the first place. Insist on co-authorship in papers because this is your right. Make the most of your seniority to portray the ideas and projects as your own in faculty meetings, media interviews, or keynote speeches. Remember, they listen to those who speak loudest and most frequently. If a graduate student complains about you taking credit for their ideas, remind them that universities are learning experiences and they have experienced something. Also, you are senior faculty and they are merely students, so who would the administration believe? If a new hypothesis appears that conflicts with your ideas that you posited in your papers, even if those hypotheses are supported with evidence, resist them at all costs. The scientific method is based on testing hypotheses, and rejecting or accepting these hypotheses are based on observations and data. But if the data conflicts with your ideas and your papers, especially when these are getting you funding, dub these new hypotheses as bad science. For only good science is that which agrees with yours and keeps the funding flowing. Find as many minute issues to nitpick as possible, even if those issues do not detract from the new hypotheses' main arguments. Do not worry about illogical or circular arguments. Snow your opponents under an avalanche of implied criticism and nitpicking. Remember, the grants must flow, and you must do everything you can to maintain this. Remember, aggression leads to fear, and fear leads to no questioning. Be overtly aggressive, obnoxious, and unpleasant, and scare people so they don't question you. Shout and speak through others who contradict, oppose, or question you. This strategy works especially well on women, young students, and nationalities that have a culture of being respectful to their superiors or elders, and those with plain good manners and decency. Always use your reviewing power for evil. Delay reviewing and ultimately reject papers that report on work that is similar to yours, especially when you've never got around to publishing on that topic because you're so disorganized. Always insert citations of your papers in reviews. This will give you an opportunity to write up your own paper and to scoop them. Remember, online journals with little peer review and gray literature can often publish faster than traditional journals. And these may be a way to claim an idea while your opponent is still struggling through the sluggish peer review process of more established journals. Reject papers that conflict with your work, even though the evidence suggests the studies are correct. And also reject good ideas and steal those ideas for your own. Remember to be sexist. The majority of biology and conservation graduate students are female. But if you look at the senior faculty in most departments, senior staff at the headed table at conferences, they are usually white males. These young female scientists are a threat as they are intelligent, work hard, and have new ideas. If they manage to secure one of the few faculty positions that are open and decide to raise a family, make life more difficult by denying maternity leave, not providing childcare, and scheduling lectures during school pickup times. Give them especially hard teaching working loads or expectations for field work during the school breaks. Constantly compare their research outputs to young single males who have no home life to juggle. Also, make no allowances for minorities, especially if they come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. English is not their first language, or they come from very different cultural or religious backgrounds. Always insist graduate students must take the GRE exam because this bias is for rich, privileged white students. Constantly point out their differences and set unrealistic expectations. Always make them feel as if they're outsiders and do not belong at social events and gatherings. Be passive-aggressive as well as aggressive-aggressive. If you see a student or colleague having difficulties, making a mistake, or do not understand something, don't help them. Instead, immediately report the problem to the highest level of authority that you can. Many students and early career academics suffer from imposter syndrome. So fuel their doubts and insecurities subtly and undermining criticism whenever you can. Put down the work of those that might be competing with you for positions, publications, grants, or tenure. If you're unable to formulate an argument of why their work is bad because it is not, the evidence overwhelmingly supports their well-crafted arguments or their qualifications and publications list rivals your own, resort to the ultimate weapon of the dark side. The ad hominem attack. You're likely in an institution where people believe what they are told by senior scientists because this is what science teaching relies upon. So if it's difficult to put down an adversary's work through other means, tell people that they are unethical, badly behaved, or just a nebulous bad scientist. Even better, make up a rumor. Remember, people assume that where there is smoke, even though the smoke is completely fabricated, there is fire. Remember this advice, my apprentice, it will serve you well. Now arise, doth Academy, and together we shall rule the science. So, for the rest of this talk, I'm going to be talking about how we can possibly be less dark side and more Jedi in academia, but also in conservation organizations, in government organizations, because many of these bodies, particularly for conservation, are based on practices that people learnt where they were at universities. So to bring balance to the force, I have a few suggestions, including providing support to make sure that everyone has a fair chance in academia, including, minorities, non-native English speakers, and those from impoverished backgrounds. For example, don't insist that students have to buy $500 of textbooks for each course they go on. Make accommodations for those with young families or dependents. For LGBTQ students, faculty, and staff. For those who are from different religious backgrounds, for example, don't have meetings on religious holidays or ostracize people because they can't make these. Provide more support for postdocs and early career scientists, and value all equally. Very often there's a two-class system between teaching faculty and support staff and tenure track faculty, with teaching faculty often having longer hours and less support than tenure track faculty. Reward collaboration and not competition. Provide funding for graduate students to guarantee a living wage so they do not have to, so being a graduate student is not the purview of just the wealthy and privileged. Have multiple year postdocs where support is given if moving is required, so you don't have this constant 1 year of a postdoc and then move to another part of the country and the financial burden that brings in. Provide health insurance and benefits for all graduate students, soft money researchers, and adjuncts. Provide training for professional skills such as grant writing and teaching. We're often expected to do this with zero experience. Pay developing country partners and students an equitable wage and provide overheads. If an internship requires years of experience and has responsibilities over staff and facilities, this is a job. It is not a voluntary internship, and it should pay an appropriate salary. I see lots of comments appearing from that. Value an expert's time. As a conservation scientist, if someone asks you something, your time should be valued and should not be expected to be provided for free. Lawyers and other professionals charge for their time, so why shouldn't conservation experts, particularly when you put the years in to gain experience and that knowledge? In academia, we need to redefine achievement. In evaluations, we should stop evaluating based on first authored papers or high profile funding, and we should assess publications as well on their audience and outreach. A paper that's important for local conservation might actually be better being put in a regional journal rather than a high impact factor journal that people in that country cannot access and cannot afford. Credit should be given for being a good colleague and a team player on collaborative projects. For example, how many students were mentored and how did they fare? Value student growth and improvement, not just test scores. Otherwise, people will just take the highest graded students. Give the students who have not quite so good grades a chance and see if you can nurture them. Value service to communities, volunteer board positions or committees. And if working in developing countries, how were your colleagues and students in the host country supported? Were they equal partners? How much capacity building was done? Ideally, when you leave a developing country after having worked there, you should have made yourself redundant. There should be a strong team in place to carry on the work and not be reliant upon you. Engagement, outreach, and advocacy for the well-being of humanity or the environment should be given value and not poo-pooed. And I'm going to hark back to Abigail's presentation this morning, where she said, do or do not, there is no try is a bad thing. But here, in terms of professional ethics and giving everyone an equal chance and not being toxic, here I say there is a do or do not. Do not try to prevent toxic academics. Do not try to provide an even playing field for everyone, but actually do it and get it done. Well, that was a lot fast. I went through that a lot faster than I expected. So now is the discussion part of this session. So I'm opening it up to the audience about what do they think? And maybe we can take some notes about possibilities and ways to try and improve academia. What can we do to make academia a less toxic, fairer place?
Chris, that was excellent. I haven't laughed that hard in a talk in a really long time, and everyone in the chat was saying the same thing. It makes everything seem so ridiculous when you put it all in one place that way. So we have a couple of hands up, but just to reiterate what was said in the discussion before we get off track with new discussion. So Ami said that the shady tactics that you're talking about in like the first half of your presentation are not just academia. That actually takes place in a lot of other aspects too. So, but we recognize what you were doing here. And
yes, definitely. It's businesses and so forth. Absolutely, you see the same sort of things again and again. I think in academia, because there is perhaps less pressure to avoid that, and people are actually rewarded for bad behavior in many ways. I think it's kind of sort of a goldfish bowl that's particularly bad for this.
And you talked about lawyers and like we pay them, and a couple people said like, yeah, that's true, and some lawyers make over $500 an hour. But on the flip side of that, when lawyers do pro bono, that's not only expected, it's rewarded. And so versus us, where things like sitting on committees, just we don't get. Like that's a whole section of my CV that I'm pretty sure no one ever reads. So yeah, we were kind of, that's where the discussion went. And like many state bars require some pro bono in order to do that.
Sorry, we have a technical issue here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to get rid of my screen so I can see you guys.
Okay, hold on. I'll just take it away from you.
Okay.
Stop participant sharing.
Ah, excellent. Right, great. I can see you now.
I have all the power. Okay, Abigail has her hand up, so I can go ahead and go there.
Hey, Chris, that was great. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Wait till you read all the comments because like everybody loved it, but he doesn't like Star Wars, so that was excellent. And that was a perfect opening act for you this morning. I agree with everything that you say, absolutely. But now that I'm mid-career, I'm in a position where I can start awarding PhD students studentships and postdocs, like when I can get a grant. The problem I keep having is because I'm in conservation and not like oceanography, the sorts of grants that I'm eligible for are quite low in value, and I can only give like a year postdoc. So I've managed to like not cost the lowest level of postdoc when I've done it and cost like a mid-level postdoc, but I still haven't been successful. Well, I'm in the process of being successful to get a 2-year postdoc. But that culture of only being able to afford a 1-year postdoc, it's so awkward because I don't want people to have that, like you're never secure when you have a job for only a year, and it's unfair to ask people to move across the country, although the UK is small. And I don't want to be that person that puts somebody in that position. I want to be the person that gives somebody a 3-year job.
Yeah.
I just can't figure out how to do it. I was wondering if anybody else has that experience or any creative thinking that I haven't worked out yet or anything like that.
Yeah, and not just sort of postdoc, the whole sort of soft money thing, which in particular the UK is really bad for soft money, where it's a constant sort of 6-month contract to a 6-month contract, and
Yeah.
it's very competitive. We did just do an article about conservation scientists, academic conservation scientists that are becoming an endangered species because of the issue with conservation grants not being anywhere near as big as, for example, in the biomedical field or in big oceanography, and people being compared. So, oh, I've got a $20,000 grant. That's huge for conservation, but there's no overheads. And compared that to someone else in the department who's got $500,000 for doing something DNA related from NIH. You never get compared in the same way. And so even though you might have got one of the biggest grants ever from an NGO, you're not going to get something as big as someone from the biomedical field. So there is that problem between conservation scientists being compared between other people in the field, and that's very, very problematic. But in terms of the sort of the 3-year postdocs and so forth, I know that in NSF there was just some feedback from their postdoc program where they wanted people to go to another institution and do a postdoc there. And a lot of people complained about, well, I have kids now. I'm a PhD student who's in their 30s and I've been working on this. So I've got kids who have to move across the country. And the whole idea that you have to go to different institutions to get different experiences, I don't think is really so relevant now, where we can all interconnect electronically. Whereas back in the 1970s, it was a lot more difficult to do when you were typing out letters and communicating by snail mail. So I think this whole, you have to move around in order to get experience in postdocs, I don't think is as relevant now as it was. And in fact, it's more harmful. Sorry, I took all the airtime there, but does anyone else have any comments or feedback on that?
Yeah, I actually raised my hand to compliment this as someone who has just finished her first year as a postdoc and is in the process of being successful in guaranteeing 3 years extension on my project. When I was first invited by this professor who asked me on, I had literally just moved to a new town, like thousands of kilometers away from where his lab is set in São Paulo in Brazil. And I told him, well, there's no chance I'm going to be able to move now. My husband had just got a job here and everything. We were very happy in the new city. And he said, no, that's not a problem, because my idea is that you'd work remotely and then you can come to the lab like once every few months. And when we have some events or workshops, you come around and we'll do everything by computer. That's fine. And this was pre-COVID. So I thought, like, when the pandemic came along, I just really changed my relationship with the rest of the group, which had to go online, and they were learning how to deal with this. And I had some experience already and it worked out pretty well, actually. So I think that one big key of all this bad culture of only having the opportunity of offering 1-year postdocs is that nowadays you don't have to be there for the full year, having moved across the country, even moved like from one small city to another, a small distance. It's still a hassle. So if you have children, or if for any reason it's not even like your carbon footprint is bad and having to travel along the place to get to your lab, but you can log in and say hi to people virtually. You can be there once every few months or something, and it works. So that's probably a path that I see lots of people are going to start having as an option, instead of having to move along and still getting opportunities to work with different places. And since the funding isn't there for long projects, 3-4 years, if you have only 1 year and you can do it in this way, it worked really well with me. I'm very happy with this opportunity.
Yeah, I think one of the positives of COVID is people realizing how a lot of work can be done virtually. Yeah. And I hope that when we go back, that people will be allowed to telecommute more frequently. And certainly in terms of early career professional people who've got families and so on, it's so much more convenient in terms of childcare and so forth. So I hope that becomes standard now. Now we know that we can do it. Hopefully it will just remain as being an option. And for conferences like this, virtual conferences can be really successful. So I'm seeing now professional societies going, we really like a lot of aspects of the virtual conference. So, but we also see some of the benefits of the face-to-face. So maybe we can do more hybrids where there's partly a face-to-face and there's partly a, but there's a big part for the virtual conference side of things.
So in the discussion, we had a question from Ami. She asked, do you have any tips for the early career Jedi to navigate dealing with the Sith that are currently in power? Because like, a lot of us are in that place right now where we don't have any power. We're postdocs or graduate students. What do you do?
Yeah, I think that communicating with each other and realizing that this toxic culture is not normal. If you start getting Stockholm syndrome and sort of accepting this toxic culture, I think that's really bad. So being able to communicate with other people in the community and realizing that, no, this is not normal. This is stuff that is not happening. There are professional societies who have professional ethics. I think Jerry Unger's in the audience, and SCB, for example. Yeah, I see Jerry here. So SCB, for example, has professional ethics there, Society for Marine Mammalogy. And there is a potential for going to these societies and looking at these professional ethics and go, look, this is not acceptable in our societies. But communicating with people in other institutions and getting an idea of what is normal, communicating with people in your institution, particularly the other early career professionals, and getting support there, and then also finding some support in the senior ranks too, who can help take it to the powers that be, the right powers that be, because very often, for example, the people in seniority may be the problem people. So reporting to them isn't going to help, and they're just going to crush you in return. So find some sort of power mechanism where you can report it to the right people, and it goes up the ladder to the right places. It may very well be the board of visitors. Certainly in my old institution, the people in human resources were actually part of the problem. So reporting anything to them doesn't really help. But potentially you could go to a professional society like Society for Conservation Biology and raise an issue there if your problem people are also in the same society.
So I saw that Jamie had their hand up. Did you still want to speak? Sorry, I didn't get to you right away.
No, that's fine. I think my question partially got answered. This has been great. I just wondered, for those of us in the U.S. at universities, we're seeing now universities are at least verbally having this commitment now to diversity and equity, and it's kind of opened some doors. And so at my university, we've finally been able to get some things open to try to talk about systemic change. But what we've noticed is, oh, hi, Max. What we've noticed is that when it comes to real money, that's where the doors are closing. And I wondered if anybody else thought we might have an opportunity here, at least right now, to get some of these open by capitalizing on these universities wanting to look good with diversity and equity. I know that's pretty cynical, but
I've got an inside view because I work for NSF, and I can tell you that they really, really want to support diversifying, and they realize that there's an issue and there's a problem, but they sort of receive proposals from, they get proposals and they can't really do anything if the proposals that they get aren't diverse, apart from sort of coming back to them and saying, yeah, we need to see more diversity here. And when people submit, sometimes the diversity is very tokenism. It's like, oh yeah, we have a representative from a tribal body, but that tribal body has zero input in actually what happens. And they're just they're just sort of put on the proposal, and sometimes don't even know that they're on the proposal. So having diversity actually being an inclusion actually being part of the proposal right from the very beginning, I think is really, really important, rather than waiting to the end where they go, oh yeah, we're all bearded white guys. Perhaps we should have a female scientist, or perhaps we should have a minority scientist, or we're talking about Arctic issues. Maybe we should have someone from the Inuit community, and it's all very sort of last minute and thrown together. Diversity and inclusion should be right from the very beginning of the proposal, and there should be equal partnership in terms of the proposal writing and so forth.
So I believe Abigail is next with her hand up.
It's me again. So firstly, what you just said, Chris, about incorporating those diverse kind of stakeholders or partners throughout the proposal is really, really key. In the UK, we do this really well with policymakers in the UK and Europe, and it's co-production. So we should be co-producing that science collaboratively with the people that need it. Yeah. So if it's, like you said, the people from an indigenous group, or stakeholders or whatever, like I cannot stress that enough. This is like the first talk I've ever given where I didn't talk about, that's the thing I'm most proud about in the UK and Europe. But the reason I raised my hand was to even take a step further back, because so at University of Plymouth, I was part of the Equality, Diversion, and Inclusivity Committee, because we have this thing called Athena Swan, which is like an award you get for being diverse and inclusive at your institute. And for you, those of you that don't know, you submit an application, they give you feedback about where you're going wrong, and you submit like a plan to close that gap. And so we did a survey of the staff to say, do you identify as a man, woman, or other? What are your experiences with diversity at our university? And we got lots of people that identify as men coming back and saying, stop whining. Everybody's treated fairly in academia because we judge you based on your papers and money and that you bring in, and how can that not be fair? Stop complaining that social events aren't inclusive because they're held in the pub at 4:00 on a Friday, and basically stop whining. And when we did the analysis, it was the white men that had that response. And Plymouth is, predominantly in a predominantly white academic institute. But those responses were so different from like the women or the people of color or the people that aren't cis that responded. And we said, no, we feel like we're intimidated or we're bullied when men comment on my appearance and that kind of thing. Like, that is bullying. But how do we even get the men to see, or not just men, but in this case, but people that don't see there's a problem to recognize there's a problem when they're just like, stop whining, snowflake. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we even get them to acknowledge that there's a problem? And let me also say, we have to do unconscious bias training at the uni. It takes 30 minutes. It's on a computer, and you could just answer the questions without doing the training. So that's not really helping. So any advice on how we could encourage people to see the problem? And I am encouraged that there are so many men here today, because I have been to stuff for women in STEM, and there's no men there at all. So thank you guys so much for coming today. So any advice would be, or insights would be appreciated.
Well, in terms of so doing the surveys and then just filtering out all the white male responses and then presenting those, I guess that's one way of doing it. But yeah, so many meetings I've been in where it's been the old white males coming back saying that, oh, there's not a problem with diversity. I didn't see the problem of unpaid internships. I had an unpaid internship and it had no problems for me. It's like the sort of, oh, my parents beat me soundly every day and I grew up to be a healthy person. Yeah, it's so many times. And in terms of diversity inclusion meetings, the number of times people have said, well, Chris, can you come and talk to us about diversity and inclusion? Look, I'm the last person who should be talking as the whitest British, most colonial, beardy old guy in the world. I have zero diversity, literally, in my genetic upbringing. It's all purely British Why are you asking me to sit in a diversity meeting? We have a fundamental problem here. So yeah, I really don't know. So I'm open to ideas about how to deal with that.
It's just so tricky to like make people recognize that just because it's not affecting you doesn't mean it's not a problem, you know? And I'm sure I can't read the chat, but I see stuff flashing up, and probably all of us have experienced that. So if we think of any ideas during the week, maybe we could mention them, because, you know, as those of us are getting to our like mid-career stage or more senior stages, we are more influential, but obviously with women and minorities, there's fewer and fewer of us at that level. So to get our peers to see that there's an issue. So maybe during the week, if we think of things, we could kind of like bring them up, because I think it's something that really does affect all of us, and it's at the detriment of conservation.
I think we could put a thread. We have threads for every talk now, I think. We could start a thread with people's ideas for this. Chris, do you have a reply? If not, then there's Fabian next.
I do see hope in seeing a lot of committees where there is more diversity coming in, but I think it will take a bit of time to change. Because if you, for example, this Society for Marine Mammalogy, if you look out in the audience there, I would say the average marine mammal scientist is a Latina female. And like 80% of the audience is female, and just looking at the membership numbers, huge diversity in the young scientists coming through. But again, you look at the senior table, you look at the top table, it tends to be all white North Americans. If there are more opportunities for younger people to become involved in boards, and rather than the sort of senior North Americans, I think that will help things. And you've been in UN Decade meetings, and I see a lot of UN Decade for the Oceans, and I see a lot of positive comments from that, because they keep talking about co-design. They had early career professionals as being part of the steering committee, so it's not just the same old. So if more societies took that, they had a quota for early career professionals, and not just a student rep, a token student rep who has no voting power, but there's actually a major sort of component of the body that's and just look at the sort of makeup of the bodies as well. But I think there could be a lot of other possibilities for different methods that people could perhaps suggest.
Yeah, for sure. Fabian, I believe you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. Can you hear me okay?
You're a little quiet.
Okay, I'm going. I'm sitting in a camper in the middle of nowhere in Brandenburg, Germany. It's dark outside, and it's so awesome to be connected to you all and to listening to this discussion. I love this discussion. Thanks for that. And certainly in the field of cytology, whale and dolphin biology, there's maybe not a strong bias, but a distinct bias towards women who make good careers, big careers, and some of the biggest names in cytology are women, and that's good to see. And what occurs to me during this discussion, we had an interesting theme in the MAMAM discussion group, which is the email worldwide discussion group dealing with marine mammals, and that was going around the issue of unpaid or paid interns, and also that discussion in some way expanded into diversity and equity questions. And it occurs to me that using such tools like email discussion groups, where all the people kind of have to listen to you or have to read what you're saying, may be a very good way to spread those ideas that we are discussing here, to make them available to the broader field and to make them more like standard in the future. So and certainly the Marmam group is very liberal, I would say, and very open to such discussions. But it may be worthwhile. I'm not very experienced with other discussion groups, but it may be worthwhile to try such tools because we have them at hand, and it's easy to post, and it should be easy to start such discussions or to continue them. Thanks.
Yeah, if there are, I think with sort of online meetings and so on, there's a lot more potential for equality, where it's not just, can I afford to go to this workshop or a meeting? So that more participation, but they also need to be safe spaces, because you mentioned Marmam, and back in the day, Marmam used to be quite feisty and used to be much more of a discussion board than it is today. And certainly I encountered situations where I would raise a topic like, isn't this thing bad? Isn't, Taiji drives for dolphins bad? And then you get senior people weigh down on you and sort of smash you to a pulp. How dare you say that, you young whippersnapper? So there needs to be a place where it's safe to have comments without senior people attacking you, and sort of listening respectfully, and not just sort of, where you can talk without fear of retribution, because that was definitely a situation with Marmam. People would get retribution for comments that they said back in the day.
Nikita, I believe your hand was up next.
Thank you. That was such a fantastic conversation starter, I'm going to say, because I think there's so much for us to dive deep into here. And I'm just so grateful that we're having this very difficult conversation, and it's beautiful that we're having it globally. And that just like how connected we are, I think that is amazing, and it speaks a lot for our future in conservation and what is possible when we're able to overcome, or at least beginning to have the conversations of overcoming these major challenges. And a lot of it is that we had an excellent presentation yesterday about the history of mindfulness. And I think it's also important for us to remember the history of academia and how elite, and I mean, to be a scholar is a luxurious experience. And the reality is that most people who are scholars today don't have the means and lifestyle to support what the original scholars, like they were in courts of kings, and and this isn't how we're living now. And so it's about, we have to redefine what scholar looks like in the 21st century. And I think that's really awesome, because it allows us to bring in these mindfulness practices and this co-creation. And a big part of that is understanding that academia, as we know it, has barriers to entry. And those barriers are real. And unless we are intentional with how we remove those barriers, and this is why I spend so much time in the open science space, because when you talk about, especially the impact of our work, whether it's the conservation impact, the climate change justice impact, we need access to information. We have such incredible tools within our brains, and we need to be able to apply them to these extraordinarily challenging problems. And the best way that we can do that is by understanding all these multiple perspectives through co-creation, and then creating the solution. So I'll be talking about some tools for how to address some of these issues, but to continue the conversation. But thank you all for this fascinating and important discussion.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat here as well. I was really privileged in some ways that when I went to university, I lived in a UK where you got fully funded for university, and you got a livable grant, and that things were subsidized. And during the holidays, you could claim unemployment benefit, and so forth. So I was going from a background where I was first generation. My father worked in a factory. There was no way that we could have gone. If I'd have gone to university today, I don't think I could have been able to afford it. But the UK had a system where anyone could go to university, and there was a lot more support, and places like Oxford and Cambridge were looking at their input from comprehensive universities, and private universities or public universities in the UK had lots and lots of scholarships available for people who were poor but who could pass the entrance exams. And so fully a quarter of my classmates were coming through what was called the assisted program, assisted place, where we came from inner city backgrounds and so on. So there were systems in place, and a lot of those have disappeared. So just go back to the 1980s UK, and then US. Oh my God, look at the UK. And there are systems that and Denmark and other places. There are countries that have these systems in place. Just copy them.
Okay, so I believe Naomi was next.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what Chris was mentioning about, being smacked down by the old, what I always refer to as silverback gorillas. Yes. When I first, and this is just sort of a cautionary tale, but also a piece of advice for some of the younger women who are attending the conference. When I first started out, Marmam was definitely a more rigorous discussion forum. And in fact, I think I can take some credit for the fact that it is no longer that and is somewhat more sedate, because some of the things I brought up happened to be very controversial issues. This is back in the early 90s. So, almost 20 years ago. Oh gosh, almost 30 years ago. Sorry, I can't do math. And the topics I would raise just really talk about triggering some of these older white guys. And I got to, they just absolutely lost their tempers on email. This was back when email was pretty new, and certainly anything like a discussion list was very new. Marmam was it was founded in 1993, and this is like in 1994, 1995. And I would raise a topic and they would take great offense at it. So I'm a 30-something, just starting out female marine biologist, and they're old white guys, silverback gorillas, in the field. And they're absolutely tearing into me, calling me names, accusing me of calling them names. It was really quite shocking. And a couple of older white guys came to my defense, but I came to my own defense. And so here's the advice. I just thought it was ridiculous. I mean, this is long before Me Too, long before, women were more prevalent in the sciences. And I just thought it was all absolutely ludicrous that these older white guys were screaming at me very unprofessionally in a public forum. And I basically said that. And that's how I established my rep. If, there's not very many people here at this conference who know my reputation in the marine mammal field, but what I have is because of those early days on this discussion forum. To this day, people come up to me and say, I first was introduced to you because of the things you used to say on Marmam. And so my point is, stand up for yourself, and especially today, where I think, compared to the way it was 30 years ago, it's more inclusive, more supportive for you to stand up for yourself. Absolutely stand up for yourself. Do not be afraid to do that. And where you are, where it is difficult for you to do that, for whatever reason, for your own personal history, that it's difficult for you to do that, do know that the atmosphere today is far more supportive of that choice. If you choose to make that choice to stand up for yourself in a public forum, women are doing this today in the marine mammal field, like at conferences, back in the before times when we attended them in person, during the business meeting at the marine mammal conference, and somebody says, some older white guy says something that some younger woman disagrees with, that younger woman will stand up and say, I disagree with you, older white guy. And I totally encourage that, if you feel up to it, of course. And if you don't, just think about it. You're going to get more support than you think. For those of us who trailblaze doing that, I was just born contentious, and I don't like it when men are, mansplain and do things like that, and also lose their temper at anybody in public. It's just very bad behavior. But I've never really felt very shy about doing that sort of thing. But if you do, you do have a lot of support for standing up for yourself. And I encourage it.
Yeah, I definitely say that for the Society for Marine Mammalogy, sitting behind the scenes, there is a lot of, we completely respect people's opinions to say things, and they jump down the throat of people who have sort of come in, fists flying and so on. So that would not have happened 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, it is remarkable how many people come up to you later. I've had so many established marine mammal biologists, a lot of the men, come up to me in private and say, I'm so sorry you had to put up with that. I'm so sorry, so-and-so said that to you. I'm so sorry he misbehaved. I would love it if they do it publicly. At the time, so-and-so misbehaved. But it is something that they will also, it is something that they'll come up to, at least in private, and say that to your face. So again, you have a lot of support for standing up for yourself, whether it seems obvious or not.
Yeah, I just see Chelsea's made a great point here about when
gonna say that.
Yeah, when you have the irate people going, rah, 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 well, thank you for volunteering to chair that committee or to write a paper on this. Yeah. And then they disappear. So you get
nothing gets rid of people faster.
Yeah.
Then, oh, I can't wait to see you at next week's meeting. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts then. They are gone. Like, great.
Absolutely. That's a great tactic to do.
Yeah, I see Abigail just said it's another thing to say is, do you think it's appropriate to me? And another thing that I learned working retail is when people say really rude things, I pretend I didn't hear it. And I just say, I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear you. Could you say it a little louder? And I do this over and over and over again until they're so embarrassed at what they said that they stop saying it.
That's good. Okay, so just for everyone's awareness of time, we have 8 minutes left. So Carly had her hand up next.
Yeah, I wanted, and thank you again for this great conference for everyone who is involved. I think this is the most that I've ever spoken publicly to strangers ever. But I wanted to bounce back to what Abigail and Chris were talking about with diversity and just being on committees, and kind of as a cis white female, I realized that I, to a certain extent, have a lot of privilege. And something that I've been noticing in my department grad group lab is that a lot of the emotional burden and emotional labor is placed on those token diverse members. And as someone who wants to support them, I'm thinking of one of my lab mates is Black and one is Latinx, and it's so absolutely frustrating to see these mid-career or even further on faculty members kind of, when we are all craving this discussion of diversity in science, diversity in our lab, and it's oh, we can dedicate one lab meeting to that, and it's such a bigger issue than that. And then on top of that, the faculty are wanting these members, these marginalized women, to take on this burden and to all of a sudden teach everyone. And so I just wanted to kind of ask the group, how do you all deal with this situation? I want to be able to address it, but without being white saviory, but also I realize that I am not in a position to talk about diversity to the full extent. So just getting a feel for any interventions that could help.
Go ahead, Ami, if you want to respond to that.
Thank you, Carly, for that. And I appreciate you speaking up about it. It's kind of scary territory to walk in, because on the one hand, you want to support, but then something that's happening a lot when allies come forward and say, how can I help? The BIPOC community is kind of feeling spicy right now, considering everything that's happening. It's kind of come to a big boil. And so say, for example, you're a young kid and you come home and something's happened, like you left a mess in your room working on your experiment, and you had to run to school to like go and turn it in, but you left a mess, and your mom is really angry. In the moment when she's like hopping mad, it's not necessarily great to be like, oh, like, I'm so sorry, how can I help? She's going to get even more angry, right? Like, what do you mean, how can you help? You should have done this. And so it's kind of hard to like come forward and offer help, and then the response is people coming from their suffering, from their hurt, and saying, what do you mean, how can you help? From my own individual perspective, because I also don't want to be attacked by the hurting BIPOC community, is to learn how all the isms, racism, sexism, what have you, show up in yourself. Reading books, attending seminars. And when you learn how to see like how it's showing up in yourself, you can more readily see how it's showing up in others. And so then you will see like, oh, wait, that thing that person said is not okay. That way you don't have to ask the minority in the group that was offended why they're having an emotional response to something happened, because you didn't pick up on it. Because we all, no matter what walk of life we live in, we all live in we experience some sort of privilege that another person does not. And so we're not going to pick up on things. And we are not mind readers. And sometimes we get upset when other people are not. Because how can they not notice this thing that's happening that's so loud, that I experience so loudly? We expect the other person, how could you not notice? And especially like if you've been like in partnership for a long time and you're raised, especially as a woman, where you're supposed to pick up on subtle cues so you can anticipate other people's needs, we forget that we as females or the submissive were raised differently than the others, where you come home from school and your parents expect you to do like, oh, well, you have to, clean the floor or whatever while your brother is watching the game with your dad. They're not going to pick up on things because they walked a different experience. And so find all those books that have become popular, like How to Be Anti-Racist, etc., and just take it in doses, because it's heavy and it can become overwhelming. And like when it's like too much, it's all right, let's put this book down, I'm going to go read some sort of sci-fi fantasy or what have you. And then when you feel like you've got, energy to go back to that book, go back to that book. Learn how all these things show up in yourself, and then you will see how it shows up outside. And then from there, learn some communication classes on how to approach people about things that bring up things in yourself. Because like, if you imagine like when you feel or know in the moment that you're right, how do you feel the moment you find out someone tells you you're wrong? It feels horrible, right? You're like embarrassed, you're ashamed. And the first thing you want to do is like, put up your dukes and protectors. I don't want to look at me naked, So there are ways to communicate these things and to read when it's great to communicate these things so that people will be more receptive. Because the first thing we want to do is like, that's really popular right now is like, you are not recycling correctly. That does not go there, that goes here. And like, can you imagine like just going out into the world and that's happening left and right, and you're just trying to do the right thing, and eventually you're just like, forget it. Everything's going into the trash bin. I don't care. I'm done. I'm over it. Which is why I want to say Trump supporters are so, because they're tired of being shamed for like, oh, you're doing the wrong thing. And Trump gives people permission to be like, I'm this person and I don't care, and it feels great. And everyone's like, oh, thank God I can stop like walking on eggshells. This feels fantastic. And what does that give them permission to do? All the extreme things that are happening right now that don't directly affect them because privilege. That is all I have to say.
I think that can be sort of extended more broadly to conservation. That I see a lot of people in NGOs going, you're a bad person for doing blah, blah, blah. And then people just become more entrenched, or they become defensive or offended. And so using strategies to kind of conversion therapy. And so, you know, we know you did a bad thing in the past, but here's how to do a good thing, and here's how to listen to people, and not come at it with an approach where people just become more entrenched and defensive. And that goes to a whole variety of things in conservation, whether it's trying to stop Norwegians from whaling, or Japanese from driving dolphins into bays and so on. If you come at them with "you're bad," it is not going to get them to change. It's just going to get them to double down. And that goes for Trump supporters too. It's the same sort of.
And with that, we are now officially out of time for this session. So I just